All right. Well, welcome everyone to the December meeting of the Colorado Hydrogen Network. This is our 5-year anniversary, almost to the day from when we got started, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. I've got kind of a list here of not so much members, but either companies or other hydrogen organizations, and so forth that we're kind of affiliated with, connected with, that we regularly communicate with, those kind of things. So, um, if you spot something that's amiss here, that's either incorrect or missing, um, I guess you could put a message in the chat or shoot me an email, something like that, just to let me know. And be happy to update this. I have updated this from time to time, but it could be a little bit out of date. So, at any rate, really got a nice group of folks that we're affiliated with here. So, on the agenda today, just real briefly, wanted to talk about a helium and hydrogen conference that's coming up because it's in Denver. Um, let you know about that. Just saw just a little while ago, flew by on LinkedIn. There's a new paper on geologic hydrogen by somebody that we're affiliated with, Jeff Ellis, who's out at the Geological Survey and School of Mines. So just talk about that a little bit. Going to talk about the so-called sponsored fleet of passenger vehicles that I'm planning to do once we've got a fuel station going here. Uh, whoever wins first on the fuel station, we'll get that kicked off. And then I do want to take a look back at what's happened in the last 5 years, kind of talk about the state of hydrogen here in Colorado, and a little bit of a look to the future. All right, so this conference that's coming up, it's put on by the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists. It's going to be here in Denver. They don't have a real detailed agenda yet, but the dates are April 9th and 10th. They'll be having a series of lectures as well as an exhibit hall with booths and things. And we are expecting to have a booth at that. I did a little bit of horse trading with them to make that possible. And also, I've submitted an abstract for a presentation, just basically talking about some of the business aspects of hydrogen and building the hydrogen market. So I haven't heard yet if that's accepted. But anyway, hopefully we'll see some of you there. It's not real cheap. It's right now it's $700 to attend the event. Goes up to 800, which is pretty typical for an event of this type. But I realize some of us with startups and out of our own pockets, that may be a little bit dear. But hopefully we'll see some of you there. And this is important because I really consider hydrogen from geology to be the likely lowest cost source. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the meeting here. So I mentioned we've got a paper that's come out just on December 13th, so just a few days ago. The ink is still wet on this. Jeffrey Ellis and Sarah, I think it's pronounced Gelman, but I apologize if I've got that wrong, with the USGS. And it's a model that predicts global hydrogen resources, probably one of the first passes at trying to get a handle on how common is this and what do we know to date. But one of the things I pulled out of the abstract is that the predicted amount of recoverable hydrogen contains more energy than all proven natural gas reserves on Earth. So could be a pretty significant source of energy and clean energy at that. So we'll see how that goes. Um, we've talked about this before, and to some extent, this type of hydrogen could be considered renewable because some of the processes that are producing it are probably ongoing, although perhaps they're a little slower than we'd like for continuous source. But this could be somewhat renewable. Not all of these sources probably will be renewable, but I put a link to this paper uh, using my little tiny URL, shortening because it was a fairly long link. So if you want to just go to tiny URL and just type in GOH2 paper, I think you need the caps. I'm not sure, but that'll be an easier link than trying to write down what a long link is on this right now. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about this idea of CHN sponsoring a fleet of passenger fuel cell electric vehicles as soon as we get a fuel station going. So the idea here, or the purpose of this fleet, really would be to not only provide some offtake for the fuel station to help with its return on investment, but primarily, I think the main feature of this would be advertising and public awareness. I'm picturing that these vehicles would display some decals promoting hydrogen and significantly promoting it here in Colorado. And then I think this also gives us a chance. The people driving these vehicles would, of course, have their own network of people that they could be giving some word of mouth PR to this about. We could also use this as an entree to get media coverage on the fuel stations and things that are happening around hydrogen. And I'm anticipating that the people operating these would be basically enthusiasts and early adopters that would operate the vehicles. And the other thing about this is that these passenger vehicles would be in advance of the fuel cell vehicle sales and service from the automakers because the automakers are reluctant to start selling fuel cell vehicles. I mean, especially Toyota's really gotten burned out in California with some of the lawsuits. People have been unhappy about the way it works. But these initial people operating these fleets would understand, hey, there's only one fuel station, maybe two fuel stations. If the car breaks down, it may have to go back to California for service and so forth. But they would understand that, and that would basically be told to them up front before we've got enough fuel stations where the automakers feel comfortable about selling the vehicles and standing up the dealerships because there's a fair amount of expense involved in converting a dealership so that it can work on hydrogen safely. So I continue to collect names of anybody who's interested. I think we're still about a year out on this program, so they you have to be patient. I've gotten calls from a few people that actually have Mirais and so forth that they came over from California and looking for fuel. Well, this is out there a little bit, but you're all familiar with this, the three passenger vehicles that are out there from Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai. So, to this end, I got connected with some pretty interesting folks at Honda at this so-called Hydrogen Mountain Retreat that CERAD Enterprise Partners had up in Boulder at the end of September and beginning of October. And subsequently, we've had two telecons with some of their executives, basically to just put Colorado on their radar, let them know that we are organized here. We're looking at trying to sponsor a fleet of vehicles before they really feel comfortable about having full-blown sales and service here. So the role of the hydrogen network would be basically to find and enlist and manage the drivers to help educate the drivers about the characteristics of the program. Like I mentioned, we may only have one station. If the station is down, which we hope it's not, but it could happen from time to time, they have to understand that's part of the program here. And also just educate them about the usage of the vehicles and so on and so forth. And also, of course, a little bit on safety. It's pretty simple, so there isn't a lot to say there. But the role of the automaker, whether it's Honda, Hyundai, or Toyota, or maybe all three, is to make some vehicles available for lease and get them to the Denver area. Help us with arranging servicing, whether it's done locally or in California. And then also, I'd really like to see these vehicles have graphics like the vehicles that NREL has in their stable. So this is an ongoing effort. There's no decisions, of course, forthcoming from Honda yet, since this is probably a year away. But want to start getting this on their radar, getting them thinking about this whole paradigm of, hey, don't expect that somebody's going to put up a dozen fuel stations and you just automatically start selling vehicles here. It may take a little bit more than that, and we'd like their help in trying to basically just move this whole idea forward. So, any comments before I move on here? Alrighty. Well, it's certainly actually this is first half of 2026 is probably when this is going to happen. All right, so let's switch gears again and talk a little bit about the network in the past 5 years and look forward to the future. So most of you know, but maybe not all of you know, that the network was formed in December of 2019. I had the idea to do a nonprofit, and then it turns out coincidentally, Dr. Brian Wilson and Franz Westenbrink were thinking the same thing, and so we found out about each other actually through NREL and decided to kind of collaborate and just obviously do one organization. We don't need more than two nonprofit networks here. The launch of the hydrogen network was done via a charter meeting that we had. We had some folks from NREL were there and the Colorado Department of Transportation. We had Department of Energy folks, some folks from the Energy Office. John Cornish from EPC was there as well. And we kicked around the idea. We got feedback, suggestions. We even picked the name of the Colorado Hydrogen Network at that point. And that's really how we started. I didn't feel comfortable just announcing, hey, we're doing this. I really wanted to maybe give it a little bit of credibility by getting some feedback from the folks that, were kind of stakeholders in this to start. We're a nonprofit, 501c6, which is usually considered to be like a trade association. We can't take tax free donations and things like that, but we are a nonprofit. And really, the motivation to start this organization was obviously we want to help deploy clean energy, but I really wanted to focus where the help is needed the most. I haven't ever felt the need to try to jump into the clean energy space around the utilities. I think that's going to happen on its own. And as a small organization like we are, we can't move the needle there much. But I think there's other places where we can help through either educating or bringing stakeholders together and some of those things. So obviously, the big one there is hydrogen. Really want to help start this hydrogen market because it doesn't currently exist. And we try to do that by bringing together the suppliers, the users, the infrastructure, and basically act as a platform and a clearinghouse where we can all uh, reach out to each other and communicate and know that things are going on. Also, I think that transportation is an area still, this is a big frustration of mine where I think there's an awful lot of people out there that think, hey, they're all going to be battery vehicles someday. And clearly, that's not the case when you look at public opinion polls, when you talk to the fleets that are operating vehicles and so forth. There's absolutely a need for hydrogen vehicles. And I think that's misunderstood and underappreciated. And so that's part of why I'm really trying to spend my time moving that forward. And then something that's a little bit new, I want to talk about, and we're going to go into more detail here, talking about a clean energy hub. So extending this beyond just hydrogen to other forms of clean energy, the suppliers, the users, and the infrastructure, and try to apply the same paradigm like we've been doing in hydrogen to broaden it a little bit to biofuels and some other things. Like not so much the electricity, I think that's going to happen on its own because of wind and solar and geothermal, but biofuel, I think that's one that has yet to be recognized. All right, so to talk maybe just about the calendar and what's happened in the past, as I already mentioned, we started in December of 2019, 5 years ago, and the website was also launched. I think that went out on Christmas Day, and we incorporated it on Christmas Day in 2019. So, just a few months later, in May of 2020, launched the podcast to try to extend our voice a little bit more. And then some other things that were going on that we necessarily weren't involved with, but Colorado signed this medium duty and heavy duty zero emission vehicle memorandum of understanding. I've forgotten the number of states, 13 states, I think were involved in that. In September of 2020, CHN and NREL were able to get a donated hydrogen fuel station that was donated to CSU, and we had hoped that would be up and running shortly. It's still not. I'm a little frustrated about that, but there was a lot of issues with the basically aesthetics of that as far as zoning and those kind of things go that really just delayed that. So New Day Hydrogen was launched in December of 2020. So 2020 was a fairly um, involved year, not just because of COVID, but because of some of the things that happened around hydrogen. Something you all, I think, have heard of is the Senate Bill 20, passed in 2021, Senate Bill 260, which formed the means really to fund vehicles as well as fueling and charging as well, called the enterprises. There's the Clean Fleet Enterprise, the Clean Transit Enterprise, and the um, ah, I was for the Buford, help me out. The Community Access Enterprise.
Yep.
It's got kind of a funny,
Yep.
yeah. Sorry, I always draw a blank on that one because it's not named similar to the other ones. But that basically provides some assistance to close the gap between the current vehicle, which would be gas and diesel cost, and hydrogen and battery vehicles. So the Colorado Energy Office published opportunities for low carbon um, hydrogen called a roadmap. That was in October of 2021. Then in February 2022, the Western Interstates Hydrogen Hub was formed to pursue one of the hydrogen hubs, which we ended up not getting, but that really brought a lot of people together that I think still have some momentum, and I think some things are going to still come from that. Of course, the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which has production and investment tax credits, vehicle credits, and so forth um, for hydrogen, was pretty significant. Then the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act with $9.5 billion for hydrogen hubs happened in November of 2022. And also that same year, Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade awarded 250,000 to New Day Hydrogen to help with fuel stations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. May of 2023, Colorado passed this House Bill 1281 to advance the use of clean hydrogen, which is a production tax credit of $1 per kilogram. And then, probably most significant to help us get fuel stations going here was in January of 2024, this year, the Federal Highway Administration awarded 9 million, excuse me, $9 million grant to CSU and New Day Hydrogen to deploy the three hydrogen fuel stations in Fort Collins, Denver, and Pueblo. And then our most significant milestone, I would say, was our October 2024 first annual Colorado Hydrogen Day. And we hope to make that an annual event each year. So, um, those are the things that I've noted here. And, Elliot, you're on my screen there. If you've got a milestone that you would consider significant that you'd like to mention, or Buford or anybody else, give you a second here to just speak up.
Well, I'll go ahead first. We don't have, we're in the process of still working out some arrangements and hopefully soon. It's just the thing that's really challenging is drags on and drags on and drags on. And it's just the nature of the beast right now. But we're excited about the future and we think good things are going to happen. And um, uh, as, uh, as I mentioned earlier, we have an associate of ours on this call from Michigan, and we're working actively in that state as well right now. And Michigan is a grantee of the one of the hydrogen hubs as well. And there's a lot of activity up there going on. So we're excited about that.
Well, great, Elliot. And I, of course, want to help you and promote everything you're doing. So be sure to send me any news so that we can get it either in the newsletter or talk about it at this meeting or whatever I can do to help.
Well, thank you very much. And, I know Buford probably has a lot to say too. He has a lot going on. Thank you, Buford.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Brian, thanks for everything you guys do, everything Colorado Hydrogen Network does to promote hydrogen. Definitely greatly appreciated. The only other thing I wanted to add, you've hit a lot of the highlights for New Day Hydrogen, but we did recently we received in association with Drive Clean Colorado, the DOE's Vehicle Technology Office grant, which was intended to bring three medium-duty fuel cell electric trucks into the Colorado market, basically on a lease basis to to allow fleets to try them out, not only in their specific use cases, but obviously in this specific geographic region. Unfortunately, the same day that we received notice that we had received that, our vehicle OEM, Quantron, a company out of Germany, declared bankruptcy. But with Drive Clean, we actually reached out to DOE and asked them if they'd be open for us reaching out to other OEMs. And unlike normally how the federal government works, DOE was very up for that and gave us a lot of flexibility. So we reached out to several entities. I'm very happy to announce that one of them has accepted. It's still confidential at this point, so I can't release who, but it is a brand name vehicle provider as well as a local fleet customer that are going to basically join forces and bring those first three medium duty trucks into the Colorado market. Showing off very similar, Brian, to your concept and around the light duty, having them wrapped, showing people that hydrogen, what hydrogen could do, what it can do in those specific use cases, and probably most importantly for a lot of people, what it can do specifically here in the Colorado geographic region. So we're excited about that and hoping that we can announce exactly who the players are sometime here in the near future.
So, Buford, I do in one of the later slides make note of that grant,
Awesome.
but let me ask you, are you envisioning that those three trucks are going to be almost like loaners, where for some limited period of time you'll lend them out to fleets so they can try them out?
Yeah, that was the original intention of the grant, is that it would be on a short or longer term lease basis where they could try them out. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to modify the basics of the vehicle once we set that. If it's a box truck, if it's a utility truck, whatever. However, with the adjustment and the fact that we've been able to bring in not only an OEM but a vehicle, but a customer, a fleet customer. It looks like that it's not going to basically be available for just anybody to utilize, but that customer will be utilizing them in the Denver region, showing them off as hydrogen vehicles operating in that use case in the Denver geographic area.
Great. All right. Well, congratulations on that grant. And
Thank you.
all these things just kind of help move the needle forward a little bit. And I think really make a big difference.
Yep.
Well, kind of like you've said before, we're dealing with a chicken and the egg here. A lot of us are working on the infrastructure side. Well, if the vehicles aren't there, the infrastructure side is not only going to get so far. So this was our attempt to try and get the vehicles into the market as well, just like your thought on the light duty. Get them in the market, show them to people that what those vehicles can do in this specific geographic region, as opposed to saying, well, they work in Europe, they work in Asia, they work in California. We can now show that they work here in Colorado in our own backyard.
Yeah.
Yep. And thank you so much for bringing that up, Buford. This is Quinn O'Brien from Drive Clean, and we are really, really excited to get started on that project. Like you mentioned, I mean, it was just an unbelievable coincidence that the second we got the contract from the DOE, our vehicle provider filed for bankruptcy. So it was just an unbelievable coincidence, but so glad we were able to get it to work out here. And yeah, once we can release details about the specifics, I mean, we're really excited about the manufacturer we're going to be working with. And we're really excited about the fleet customer that we're going to be working with too here in Colorado.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Quinn. Elliot's got his hand up. Go ahead, Elliot.
Yeah, sure. Buford, if I may, how are you guys how's your progress coming on your fueling station development?
We're progressing. Thanks for asking. Took us a little longer to get the grant agreements in place than we had anticipated. So the grant agreement between CSU and Federal Highway was executed back in August. We finally got our subrecipient agreement with CSU executed in November. So we've kicked off things. We've actually executed an agreement with EPC with John Cornish and David Cornish out of Cheyenne as far as being our design entity. So we're kicking off those activities. We've actually contracted with an environmental firm also. Since this is a federal grant, we basically must meet the requirements of NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. So we're kicking off those activities on the proposed site. So we're we're raring to go. We've got things kicked off. So thank you, and really anticipate it. Once the turn of the new year happens, we'll really ramp things up.
Congratulations, Brian. I know you, Buford. I know you guys have been working really hard on this. So
Yeah, when we started this, I had a full head of hair. I don't have that anymore. So
why do you think I wear a hat?
exactly, exactly.
All right,
Anyway,
thanks, guys.
congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, any comments or questions from anybody else before we move on here? Like I say, we got plenty of time. All right. Well, we'll keep going. I did want to basically just spend a minute talking about some of the episodes on the podcast, the Hydrogen Nowcast. Really encourage folks to go back to these, maybe not even so much for yourself, but maybe you'll get questions from people that could be answered by directing them to a podcast. We started out the very first episode talking about just the fundamentals of fuel cell EVs and hydrogen fueling. I mean, this was a few years ago and wanted to kind of get that out there so that people had something to refer to. Over the years, we've had, Keith Whipke was on talking about NREL. One of our stakeholders, Starfire Energy, that does ammonia, had them on. Electric Green, who's been on several times, talking about their home energy storage systems as well as their um, mobile hydrogen refueling systems. Introduced the idea of hydrogen coming from petroleum wells. It was Proton Technologies back then. They've since changed their name to Proton H2. Had New Day on a couple of times, two or three times, I think, and doing that. Then I did a show, number 20, basically addressing some of the environmental criticisms of hydrogen. I think it's misunderstood, and we see sometimes the environmentalists think hydrogen is just prolonging petroleum, and that's really not the case. So I really wanted to address some of that. Wanted to do a little bit of a humorous, entertaining podcast, so number 26. I put on a fake Austrian accent or Swiss accent and talked about played Einstein to talk about what he'd buy. Elliot, go ahead. I'll pause.
There's a real question. Where can we find your podcast at for the people that don't have access to that or haven't seen that yet?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot, for that. It's on most of the major podcast apps, and if you just simply search for Hydrogen Nowcast, it'll come up. And I have lost track of all of the apps that carry it, but all of the major ones certainly do, especially um, iTunes or Apple Podcasts. All right, so kind of continuing here, my pet peeve is everybody inventing new colors for hydrogen, not really understanding what they mean. So I did a podcast on that. I realize I'm probably a very tiny voice in this chaos out there, but felt I really wanted to put a stake in the ground about that. Talked also about comparing EV charging or battery charging and EV fueling. Did a podcast on that. Talked about methanol as a hydrogen carrier on number 33. Again, for hydrogen skeptics, number 34, that if you listen to that, yeah, that may be something you can direct people to that maybe question you about why all this hubbub about hydrogen. We had AAA and New Day back when AAA announced that they were interested in getting hydrogen vehicles, and I think that's still kind of in work in the background. Had uh, Cummins on to talk about internal combustion hydrogen engines back in number 43. And then did two podcasts with Richard Sayer, formerly with Los Alamos National Labs, talking about using algae for direct air capture of carbon dioxide and the biofuels and hydrogen and other things that can be done with that. Very interesting concept. Also did a show about using natural gas. Basically, this would be done probably at the home or at the business into a small appliance to convert that to solid carbon and hydrogen as kind of a stepping stone between when we have full-blown clean energy available everywhere and where we are today. Modern Electron has since changed their name to Modern Hydrogen, and I did just see a news article that they are have raised 25 million for their efforts. So they are very much still out there and in the field. Talk about natural hydrogen wells. That was with Vyacheslav Zgonik, who wrote one of the original papers on natural hydrogen energy. And then subsequently, we did another one, number 82, down here with Jeff Ellis, who just mentioned his paper that's out there. Did a show about geothermal energy. I think that's really one to watch, especially in Colorado here, where we've got pretty good heat pretty close to the surface. I really expect, as does Governor Polis, that geothermal energy is going to become a real strong player here in Colorado. In addition, probably to the wind and solar, and solar could really find its niche for small scale on homes and buildings. Wind, obviously, where it's windy on the coasts and out in the Great Plains. And then here where we've got good geothermal energy, I really expect that we're going to see some significant usage of that here. So you might want to listen to that podcast to hear more about that. Hydrogen for light duty vehicles, I think that continues to be misunderstood. So I keep harping on that and did episode 69 around that. And then episode 70, here's the second episode that I did about algae and direct air capture and how that's really a pretty efficient way to capture CO2 from the atmosphere, turn it into a biofuel for the really hard to decarbonize sectors like long range aircraft as well as maritime uses. Number 71, continuing on my harping on my theme of trying to convince everyone that we do need passenger vehicle hydrogen vehicles in addition to battery, and talk about doing and how we implement that outside of California. Number 74, really wanted to feature the Element One company, who's here in Boulder, and their low cost hydrogen detectors. These are um, uh, passive detectors. They're very inexpensive and they can be sprinkled all over a device like a fuel station to really help you find a leak and fix it very, very quickly. So I think that's a significant product. Temporal matching, episode 75. I continue to try to convince people that because we're talking about energy, which already has an element of time, right? Kilowatt hours, that's energy. Um, whole idea of having to match the production of hydrogen with the usage of it at the same time is just absolute nonsense. It's a fallacy. It doesn't make any sense because, like I say, energy already has that element of time in it. Um, been sending this idea out to a lot of people, putting out news items and other things, and that still doesn't seem to be resonating with people. I think because it's a little bit hard to understand. You think of electricity as being instantaneous, and power is instantaneous, and volts are instantaneous. But energy already has that element of time. The time element's already been collected when you meter it, and so this whole idea of trying to match those temporally is just a fallacy. Hopefully, I can get some help getting my voice out there on that. Where to use hydrogen? That really helps people understand what the uses of hydrogen are. I really think that isn't well understood. I think it's because people think, oh, we've got gasoline today, we need a one for one replacement, or we have electricity, we need a one for one replacement. Not necessarily the case, and I think it's a little more complex than that. So, did a podcast on that. Number 80 basically talked about the grant for the three fuel stations that we've already mentioned. Um, 82 natural hydrogen wells, very significant source of clean energy, I think. And we'll see how that goes in the future. Um, got the CTO from Plug Power on to talk about Plug Power. And then TFL is the Fast Lane. That's a podcast for basically gearheads, I guess I'll say, automotive enthusiasts. It comes out of Boulder, and they basically had me on their podcast and rebroadcast it here as one of ours. So a lot of good information out there. Encourage you all to just maybe take a look at. I see now Apple Podcast does voice to text transcript, so that helps you maybe just take a quick glance at some of these and see if you think they're of interest or not. But got a pretty good library of information out there. So encourage everybody to just kind of keep tabs on that, be aware it's out there, and um, maybe even give it a re-listen if you've heard it, the first time it came out. I also wanted to just highlight the website. I know that's out there. All of you can peruse at it at your leisure, but want to make you aware that I do have a calendar out there, and please, any event you know of, even if it's just a happy hour or whatever, send that to me. I'll put it up on the website. I can turn that around real quick, even if it's just a couple days' notice, that's fine. Um, Also have a page that just basically talks about our initiatives, which I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail here in a minute, and also a page talking about the Colorado hydrogen fuel station efforts. And Elliot, I don't have any detail on any things you're doing, but happy to put that up there if you maybe want to send me some ideas or whatever.
Sure
Man,
will. Sure. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. I want to help promote this in every way that I can. So we've got a page that basically talks about some of our stakeholders and also a kind of a web diagram of what our network looks like, and encourage you all to at least be aware that that's out there. I also have a page that gives links to these Colorado state initiatives and some of the incentives that are out there. So that's a real handy reference point if you just want to look and find out, oh, what kind of production tax credits or other tax credits and things are out there. That's there. And then I also have a series of tech briefs that are PowerPoint slides that you can go back to look at water usage and safety and some of those things. There's podcast show notes, and of course, we've got to have an about page, as most websites do, talking about CHN. So, encourage you all to just take a look. I do try to update this website, maybe not quite monthly, but on a fairly regular basis to bring in new things and change things as things change. So, as I mentioned, I've got these tech briefs that are a series of PowerPoint slides that, probably most of the stuff the people on this call are familiar with, but you may get someone that says, hey, what's all this talk about hydrogen wells? Well, you can refer them to that. Or you get people that say, oh, doesn't electrolysis take an awful lot of water? And the answer is no. And this really puts it in perspective by comparing it to how much water a restaurant takes and some of those other things. So I guess I won't belabor going in every one of these, but just be aware they're out there. Maybe take a quick glance at these, just so you know that it's there in case this is a good resource or a reference source for any of you. All right, so initiatives. So these are the things that I really try to focus on to try to keep moving these ahead, putting some emphasis on these, bringing people together, having discussions about. Um, the ones in the upper right quadrant, I guess I'll say the podcast. We've just talked about that, and then of course the symbiosis really between fuel stations and the fleets, trying to bring those things together. Those are initiatives that have been going for quite a while, but the newer ones are around the geologic hydrogen, trying to promote that. Um, Education and workforce development, really trying to put some emphasis there, bring some activities around those things. And then this whole idea of a clean energy hub, which I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail here in a minute. So the ongoing initiatives, we've talked a lot about the grants, and Buford, here's where I mentioned the Vehicle Technology Office grant that's out there. So we can kind of check these off. I certainly didn't do much of the work on all of these, but I did have a hand in some of these, and would like to think that hopefully I was a little bit of a catalyst to get them moving. So really glad to see those kind of taking off. And then workforce development, as most of you know, that I'm actually on the board of the Horizon Educational Foundation, and trying to basically, through a number of programs like the radio controlled RC car, redundant hydrogen car racing that they do, trying to engage some of the high schools as well as what I, since I'm old, I think of these as VOTEC schools, but now the politically correct, I guess, name of that is career and technical education schools like Warren Tech and the St. Vrain Schools Innovation Center, trying to get them involved so that we can start cultivating the workforce that we're going to need in the next immediate years to work on some of this infrastructure and things that we're hoping to build around hydrogen. So these new initiatives, geologic hydrogen, really working on uh, trying to bring in things that are going to help stimulate the natural hydrogen resources here that I hope that we discover we have. And then also, Colorado's got so many old petroleum reservoirs, 20,000 at least abandoned oil wells here. And there's the chemical means of extracting hydrogen from that, a la the proton technologies, now proton H2 process, where oxygen is injected and hydrogen's created and brought up, as well as biological hydrogen. And I'm actually planning and in work right now on a podcast around this. A company Gold H2 that's down in Texas has a technique for extracting hydrogen using biology, microbes that munch away at the petroleum and release hydrogen. So watch for hopefully some activity coming up around those things in the near future. And then this fairly new idea that I've actually mentioned on the meeting here at least once before is this idea of a clean energy hub. So broadening it beyond just thinking about a hydrogen hub, but really trying to bring together all the players around supply and transport and dispensing and infrastructure and funding to put out basically a system design, solve for the what, and then how we do it. How do we bring together? Let's take one little piece. Hey, we've got somebody who's interested in supplying some kind of clean energy, somebody else who could be a user. Let's connect them up. Let's see if we can maybe get them to do some investing, maybe get some grants to make a few of these things happening. And like it says here, kind of focus those efforts, guide some in decisions, some investment around those things. And the idea would be that we would try to enlist a consortium of stakeholders, basically companies and maybe universities that we need to study some of these ideas and vet the viability or the validity of doing those. And I've already had one conversation with the Colorado Clean Tech Industries Association that CHN is formed under, and also the Colorado Energy and Sustainability Collaboratory. They've changed their name a little bit, and talking with them about getting them to participate because they would bring some of the other users outside of the hydrogen stakeholders like we have the closest ties to. And of course, the idea would be to try to find a program or a piece of this hub to go out and actually make it happen. All right, so what am I really talking about here? And I've showed this before, but a clean energy hub, of course, would consist of sources. And obvious sources are wind, solar, geothermal, as I've talked about a little bit, and not so much hydroelectric here in Colorado, but certainly other parts of the country would have that. And that's on the electron side or the electricity side. And then on the molecule side, hydrogen wells, as we've talked to, this in situ hydrogen generation, and that's, by the way, that's a trademark that Proton H2 has for their process. And then perhaps biomass and algae. We've got a lot of beetle kill trees here in Colorado. Maybe it makes sense for somebody to go out and turn some of that into lumber, and what you can't turn into lumber, maybe you turn into some kind of biomass that you can convert to some kind of biofuel or maybe hydrogen. So like to try to see some of those things happen. On the user side, something I've added new here that's just come on my radar is data centers. And these things, especially these newer ones that they are calling artificial intelligence or AI data centers, some of these things have needs and desires for like 100 megawatts of energy, which is like half of a utility scale generator. And so these things aren't trivial, and trying to find that energy, clean energy, as well as move it around is really significant. And I really think that hydrogen could possibly play a role there. And so we'll see where that goes. But The other obvious users, things like industry, aviation, uh, building heating, maybe not so much maritime here. We're a little bit landlocked in Colorado, but uh, anyway, those would be the users in this ecosystem. And then, of course, everything that has to happen between the source and the user. I mean, we may want to take, for example, biomass and maybe you want to extract hydrogen from it. So there's some kind of a conversion there. Maybe you're starting with hydrogen and you want to transport it or store it as ammonia. So that whole ecosystem of the conversions that happen, as well as the transporting, either by tanker or pipeline, and then storage. Do we convert to store or do you store it in its native format? And so all of these ideas um, um, really form, I think, what we really should think of as a clean energy hub, rather than thinking of a hydrogen hub or we've got these other energy sources out there. I really think it's time um, to start thinking of this as the big picture, the energy transition. Here's what it looks like. Here's what we think it may look like today, but maybe that changes as time goes on. But until we write it down and say, here's where we think we start, it's hard to get going. So I'd like to see that happen. Um, I think it's worth really considering the use of energy and what the likely sources are. And again, I really think that in the future, even though biofuel does involve carbon, if that carbon came from the atmosphere to create the biofuel in the first place, at least it's carbon zero carbon. It may not be carbon negative, but at least it'd be carbon neutral. Put it that way. So I think for long range aviation, for existing building heating, we may discover we've got to use biofuels for that. Change the fuel rather than changing the equipment on that. And then for maritime, I think there's a lot of merit in biofuel as we look toward the future. And of course, the market's going to tell. So this is a very busy diagram. Apologize for that, but the idea here was to try to show of the sources that are out there of clean energy and the uses and the form they probably want to see that energy take. What are some of the transitions here? And you notice I put this symbol up for new on the data centers. I really think for data centers, probably geothermal energy, turning a steam turbine and an electric generator is one source. And then I think the other is these so-called hydrogen wells, and then running that hydrogen into a turbine that turns a generator to provide that electricity makes a lot of sense. And if you think about it, if you've got a data center that needs 100 megawatts, you're going to need a full-blown transmission line to get that energy out there, and that's placing a burden on the utility. Well, what if you had a campus where you've got a underground hydrogen generated supply of hydrogen? You locate the turbine and the generator right on site, and you put the data center on site. Um, I think there's a lot of merit in doing that. You would avoid transmission lines and everything else. So we'll see where that goes, but I would really like to see this happen. And I'll talk. I guess I don't have that on the very next slide, but I do want to talk about why I think that the hydrogen network needs to be involved in this broader clean energy hub system. So, but to maybe digress just for a little bit, and I'm going to come back to that idea. I really want to make us all very aware that hydrogen has got to compete with fossil fuels in the long run. I mean, initially, we're going to have some supports and things just like solar and wind had to help get them started. But I think we need to look at what the price of hydrogen has got to be to compete with gasoline, diesel, and natural gas. And then based on what this competitive price has to be and what it costs to either move the hydrogen around or move the energy around as electricity for, say, a electrolyzer, then go back and look at what is the source of that hydrogen have to cost, and then what are the sources that meet this cost? And this is going to, I think, maybe explain a little bit why I think this overall energy hub is worth considering. So if we start with just gasoline and diesel, um, what is the cost per mile of hydrogen that's going to entice users to switch from petroleum to the hydrogen vehicles? And when we think about that, we've also got to consider that the vehicle efficiency plays into this equation here because we really want to talk about the cost per mile, not cost per kilogram or cost per gallon. That's really what we're trying to solve for. And thankfully, hydrogen vehicles are more efficient than petroleum, but that really varies by class. And there's something that CARB, the California Air Resources Board, publishes this energy economy ratio, which is the ratio of for a similar size and weight vehicle, what is the ratio of this miles per kilogram to miles per gallon? And so you can see for light duty and medium duty gasoline vehicles, they've got a efficiency ratio of 2.5. So in other words, you can take the price of gasoline in your area, multiply it times 2.5, and that's going to give the cost per kilogram that would give the user the same cost per mile. Now, for light and medium duty diesel, because diesel fuel already contains a little more energy than gasoline, this isn't quite as good. It's only 1.9. And then for the heavy duty, like a Class 8 type vehicle, for local usage where you're not on the highway, it's around 1.5. And then for a highway vehicle, it's 1.1. So although everybody is very fond of heavy duty vehicles being candidates for conversion over to hydrogen, because that efficiency isn't quite as good, it really makes it sporty for trying to come up with a source of hydrogen that can really compete with diesel, at least for the time being. All right, so this is where we've got to get with the price of hydrogen. So, what about the cost? Well, this is really intended to be at fairly low scale or small scale, I should say. The transport costs, both the capital costs of the equipment to either store or compress or liquefy or whatever, um, and then the operating expense to do that. These are kind of crude numbers, but I use 30 cents a kilogram for hydrogen at the well. And those are numbers that Proton H2 has been talking about for quite a number of years. So I feel comfortable using that. This basically gives us a cost of that delivered hydrogen, depending on which means, whether you use liquid or liquid organic hydrogen compounds or conversion to ammonia, of those numbers. So I just showed you the price that we're trying to get to. So what we need is kind of a matrix here to compare where the cost and price have some kind of overlap. And so you can see that even at 30 cents a kilogram for uh, hydrogen at the well, boy, it's pretty tough, if you liquefy it and move it even just 50 miles, which is what these numbers were derived from. I mean, and then if you go up from 30 cents a kilogram of the source, it gets even worse. So my point here is that, we really need these geologic sources of hydrogen, which is why I'm so keen on trying to make those happen. So, all right, long-winded explanation there. So if we look at natural gas, which is pretty cheap, what I did is I worked back from CH4, that's this methane, that's basically my shorthand for natural gas. This kind of varies a little bit, but right now it's about $9.60 per thousand standard cubic feet. That's, of course, at the customer, at their property line or whatever. And the BTUs out of that are just over a million. And then if we convert that back to kilograms, what does the kilogram of hydrogen have to cost? And this is basically delivered to the customer to compete with natural gas. Well, golly, $1.06. So you could probably do that with a small pipeline, a local pipeline, say connecting a well to either a data center or maybe a utility. Rough guess on my part for a small pipeline like that, maybe it's 20 to 80 cents with the operating expense plus some return on your capital investment on that. So hydrogen at the source has got to be somewhere between maybe 86 cents and 26 cents a kilogram, which the geologic hydrogen could get us there. But the point here is that if we're going to compete with natural gas, we definitely need the geologic hydrogen. So electrolysis, the electricity using XL's current grid rates and what it costs to put together a hydrogen fuel station, which I know a little bit about, that makes a cost of about $8.75 per kilogram. And that does give you a return on your investment, but you're not going to get much lower than that. So, anyway, again, my point here is that we really need this geologic hydrogen, which is why um, I'm really trying to promote that. So, takeaway here is, why does the hydrogen network care about the entire clean energy ecosystem? Well, again, because we need these other sources of hydrogen and we need the infrastructure and we need the users out there to use those. We've really got to look at the complete picture, I think. And scale is really important. If it costs $30 million to develop a well, obviously you've got to sell a lot of hydrogen to uh, get back your return on your investment. And so you're going to need a big user like a data center or a utility or a factory to get the return on your investment for those geologic sources. So, anyway, that's why I really think this is important for us to consider and try to get some pieces of this going out there so that if you want to use hydrogen from a well, somebody has gotten that out there and developed that for a user that's taking that kind of scale if you want to use that for, say, transportation. So, all right, I've been talking way too long. Elliot, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
And I think you're right on the natural hydrogen, and that's something that we're definitely, intrigued about. And my business partner who's on here still has some papers out that he's going to be releasing on that. But I think that the interesting is what does it take from the wellhead to package hydrogen to deliver to, say, a customer, a data center, a transportation company like ours, or some other form of industrial use. And that cost is, I think that's the fearful cost that might be, facing once natural hydrogen is located and can be produced, then what's the infrastructure side of that above ground?
Yeah. Well, and my idea here, Elliot, would be let's just use centers as an
Hmm.
example. All right,
Hmm.
if they need 100 megawatts, that's probably 250 tons of hydrogen, metric tons of hydrogen a day. By the time you go through the efficiencies of a hydrogen turbine and a generator and so forth, but that would make sense for them. And if you could co-locate the well and the generator and the data center all on the same campus, that would make economic sense. Now that you've got that, these guys are taking their 250 tons of hydrogen a day. Now you could show up and say, "Hey, I'd like to buy just a ton a day or something
Hmm.
for my hydrogen fuel station." And so you'd maybe liquefy it at their site there. And now you've got this ecosystem up and running for a user that had enough enough volume to make development of the wells and the cost that's associated with that to make sense. And so that's why I'm trying to show this whole picture here because I think all of these are interrelated. You're not going to go out and develop a hydrogen well just for a couple of fuel stations. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But we have to recognize that there's no market out here. None of this stuff exists. And so we have to find the low-hanging fruit, the people with the deep pockets like the data centers and so forth that
What
can make these things happen so that those of us with the shallower pockets and so forth have a source of really reasonably priced hydrogen.
One of the things that's really neat about all of that is this Front Range, particularly here, is that we have all of that. We have the
Yeah.
wells, hopefully with hydrogen, and then we have the institutions, and all of the industrial related technology companies, the IBMs, the et ceteras, the technology companies all up and down the Front Range here. And then we also have a lot of other potential use sources. So a centrally located facility like that in this market for sure could make a lot of sense.
Oh, absolutely. And you're going to run into the users out here like you walk into a data center and talk to those people and say, "Hey, did you know that you could take an abandoned oil well here, convert it to produce hydrogen, generate that electricity on site? Now you're self-contained. You don't have to worry about the electric grid and all the fees that get lumped onto those sources." So the idea here
You, you,
is put this out there so that everybody can look at it and say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't think of that. This is a great idea. Let's pursue it."
I have a bigger a one that you could add onto your list too, and that's the military. They are always looking, particularly this corridor here along the Rocky Mountains, along the Front Range, all the way from the Canadian border down south. Through here is the Defense Department. All of their strategic defense initiatives are in their core, Space Command, all those kind of things
Yeah.
are all looking for self-containment, in case of some type of happening, disaster, whatever you want to call it. They are self-contained, and whether it be vehicles, data, satellite activity, all of that, they're self-contained. So I think that that's something that's really huge and could be very, very advantageous to developing this as well.
Well, thanks for that idea. I hadn't really even thought about that, and I should have since I worked for a defense contractor for 36 years.
Well, there you go, buddy.
Yeah.
Well, that story about the forest, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah, exactly. Well, uh, I mean, we're learning and refining and tweaking as we go
beautiful.
along, but
This is a beautiful map.
well, I would just like to try to get this out there as let's start here and let's get some folks participating and throwing darts at this, making refinements, changing and editing it as we go along. And so that's why I'm reaching out to CCIA and the collaboratory to say, hey, let's bring the universities in. Let's start having some folks maybe do some studies here to say, oh, Brian, you're crazy. That little path there, that doesn't work, or you forgot one like the military, like you just pointed out. Um, to basically kind of just create a set of stakeholders that can start trying to make this happen rather than just waiting for market forces. Somebody happens to build one piece of this and finds users for it. Let's be a little bit more proactive about it.
Right. It's beautiful. It's a nice roadmap for sure.
Well, thanks, appreciate that. It's a little busy, but and this isn't intended to say every path looks like this. I mean, some of these things may come happen in different order or whatever, but at least it captures, I think, most of the pieces.
You can drill down each one of these segments too, and two or three,
Yeah.
that are working now and future, step by step by step. But obviously, I was at a transportation meeting for in Arapahoe County down at Centennial Airport, and the use of biofuels and things like that. They're really exploring that quite actively, and they are using some types of clean fuels right now, not any, not anything, no hydrogen or anything that yet, but it is in their plan and their budget. They use the Centennial Airport alone 15 million gallons a year, so it's
Mm.
significant.
Yeah. Well,
So,
this, and I've done two podcasts on it, but this idea of using algae, these will grow in salt water. And the nice thing about algae is it's got more than one product as an output. You can
mhm.
process it, you end up with a high protein animal feed. You can also end up with other different industrial chemicals that can be derived from this, as well as a biofuel. And if you say, well, okay, so it's carbon neutral because the algae pulled the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then it gets incorporated into fuel, which eventually gets burned. But you could tell the producer, all right, if we're going to let you do that, but we want you to sequester, say 10% or some number of the biofuel and just drop it down an old oil well or whatever. Now you've actually made it carbon negative. And algae is a pretty doggone good and inexpensive and easy way to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, which is something we've got to do anyway, regardless of whether we just throw away the algae or actually use it for something. So,
Mhm.
um, big believer in that one, and I hope we start to hear more about that. All right. So I felt kind of the need, State of the Union kind of idea here of just kind of look back on where things are, kind of a Colorado perspective, but not Colorado only. And I, rather than saying pros and cons or whatever, I use this the idea of pluses and minuses. So the funding for the three fuel stations, obviously that's huge, and hopefully those are out there by at least maybe the mid part of 2025. And I really appreciate and applaud the Colorado Energy Office for and the state legislature for putting in place these clean transit, clean fleet, and community access enterprises, which is going to go a long way to help bridge the gap between gas and diesel vehicle and either battery or hydrogen vehicles. And then, of course, the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, hopefully that stays intact as we move forward. Minuses, I never would have thought it would have taken over 5 years to get a hydrogen fuel station going here in Colorado. And also, I continue to be disappointed that the automakers and others aren't being a little bit more proactive, maybe is the word, on getting some of the medium duty hydrogen vehicles out there. Some of what's out there is either converted gas and diesel, converted over to battery or hydrogen, or just on a prototype basis. And I also really wish somebody in the Department of Energy or somewhere would just have a national plan for rolling out fuel stations. It doesn't even have to be funded, but at least say we need to do this, and here's some kind of a path to get to it. For example, we could say every post office with at least 10 vehicles has got to have a fuel cell or hydrogen internal combustion vehicle, because by insisting on that, then people could like Elliott or Buford could come out there and put a fuel station in to supply that. Now there'd be a fuel station and other people could use it. And it's basically lighting the match on the campfire to get things going. And what I keep coming back to, and I have this on the website, I say if we fail to deploy hydrogen vehicles, we're going to fail to decarbonize transportation, because there's just so many use cases and so many people out there that are just not going to go the battery route. I'm sorry. All right. So as I kind of usually close out things, just showing where we are in the podcast. I do have to confess, I haven't been doing a lot of episodes lately. I'm kind of running out of a little bit of new material, but I've got a few in work that will be forthcoming. So um, I tend to get notices all the time from people in all over the world asking to connect through LinkedIn and so forth. And I know they've done it through the podcast. So that's been a good avenue for us. So with that, we can open it up to some discussion. What time is it getting to be? We still got at least 20 minutes. But I do want to wish everyone happy holidays and really best wishes for a prosperous 2025. Let's hope things really start to happen. So comments, questions, anything from anybody out there?
All I can say is, Brian, from my perspective and our perspective at B&G, we're real happy that you're out here promoting this market space and the industry. And, it's real exciting to see what's going on. Of course, all of us involved would like to see this move a lot faster. And the political situation right now, just trying to figure out what's going to work and what isn't, and working through it. I do know that from our discussions, and probably Buford's as well, the state by state type of approach is going to be our best avenue at this point, and working in that direction. But it's a real blessing to have you and the Colorado Hydrogen Network available to us to have a forum and a platform in which to discuss all these things, and also get great ideas in moving forward in the industry. So hats off to you, Brian. You've worked really hard at it. It's a labor of love for you, and we appreciate you very much.
Well, thanks, Elliot. And I really want to encourage everybody to contact me. If I can help connect people up or help promote the company or do a podcast or whatever. I mean, I'm not biased. I'm out there to just basically help everybody. And as Elliot, you and Buford have talked about many times. We're trying to raise the tide that's going to float all our boats, and it's not a competition here. It's we're trying to help each other to really move this forward. And I think the more of us that are in this space trying to do things, um, the more credibility it adds to it, and it just amplifies our voice.
Yeah, I second Elliot's comments, Brian. Definitely appreciate the efforts that you've done, in Colorado Hydrogen Network, kind of being that main advocacy group here in the Rocky Mountain region, just continuing to push hydrogen forward. So appreciate those efforts. Let's continue in 25, and hopefully we can get some of these stations off the ground and up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got Colorado in the name, and when we picked that name, I agonized about it a little bit because I don't want this to be only about Colorado. We're in Colorado. That's why we're called the Colorado Hydrogen Network, but absolutely try to help with anything that's going on the coast or Alaska or Hawaii or any of those or almost anywhere in the world. I just want to see this move forward because I think every place that it does move forward helps everybody else.
Brian, on that, I would say that it's great to have Colorado in that name because Colorado, the name itself and the place that it is, entices people to think about clean and about the outdoors and about good wholesome things. So, I mean, from that perspective and in our side, I think it's a real good thing.
Yeah, and a little bit of home team pride too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go Buffs, pardon me, I CSU. Sorry.
Yeah. Go Colorado. Yeah.
Go, yeah, there you go, all the way. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we haven't heard from too many other folks. We've got time if anybody has any comments or ideas or even just send me an email at some point. Everybody wants to go wrap their Christmas gifts and go bake Christmas cookies.
Yeah, nothing here. Just want to say thank you from Drive Clean. We're always always here to support. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Quinn, and absolutely appreciate the things Drive Clean does as well. I mean, we're all in this. I think not so much a labor of love as I am, but I think our hearts are there for sure. All right. Well, one last opportunity if anybody else wants to comment. It's all good. Well, best wishes everybody for the holidays and a happy new year. And let's hope that through our grassroots effort and state efforts and things, we keep this ball rolling and hope for the best in 2025.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Brian.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a call. You gonna be around?
Yeah, give me
Oh,
just a minute or
well,
two to
okay, sure. That sounds
shut
good.
shut this down. But then, yeah, go ahead and give me a call
All
in,
right.
I don't know, give me 3, 4 minutes or something.
All right. Thank you.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.